I remember the first time I realized something was seriously off with my energy. I'd been the guy who believed that if I trained hard, kept my diet in check, and avoided all the typical excesses, I was bulletproof. I thought, I'm doing everything right. Why do I feel drained before the day even properly starts? It wasn't just fatigue slipping in like a slow fog. It was the steady, crushing weight pulling me down, making every decision harder, every interaction strained, and every goal feel just a little out of reach. At night, I'd crawl into bed convinced that sleep was the reset button, the fix-all solution. But morning came, and I dragged myself out feeling like I'd been running a marathon without rest. My mind wasn't clear. My patience wore thin faster than ever. And the motivation to push through, to be the man I knew I could be, it was slipping away. That's when it hit me. Something deeper than training or diet was breaking down. It was my sleep, fractured, chaotic, and deceptive in how it looked on the surface. I'm talking about that invisible war happening before we even close our eyes. The fact is, many of us think sleep is just about laying down and shutting off, but it's far from that. It's not a passive pause. It's a complex, vital restoration process. Yet here I was, caught in this endless cycle of waking up tired, wondering why my body seemed to betray every effort I made in the gym or the kitchen. What made it worse was realizing this wasn't about willpower or hustle. It wasn't about pushing harder. It was about what I was missing when the world went quiet. That deep phase of sleep, the kind that rebuilds your body and resets your mind, it was slipping through my fingers like sand. It wasn't just the hours spent in bed but the quality that counted. The kind that allows your body to switch off survival mode and start healing. I knew the stakes were higher than I thought. This wasn't just about feeling groggy or having the occasional bad day. This was about my core masculine energy, my strength, my drive, my presence, all tied to something subtle but unstoppable when neglected. Something that refuses to be faked or forced. My testosterone, that silent force behind so much of what I am as a man, wasn't just popping up by chance during workouts or in response to supplements. It was crafted in the hidden hours of recovery, where the body decides whether to thrive or just survive. Frustratingly, I wasn't alone. So many men shrug off these signs, blaming stress or age. They buy into the myth that sleep is a waste of time or just rest, missing how every micro-awakening, every flicker of blue light, every notification buzzing in the night is a little sabotage, a whisper to the body that this isn't safe to heal right now. Before you know it, the engine sputters even if the gas tank looks full. I realized there's this unseen battle happening every night, a conflict between the environment we create and the natural rhythms we need. I started to notice how subtle habits, hardly noticed or questioned, were chipping away at the very foundation of my vitality. From scrolling obsessively on my phone to leaving overhead lights on, I was unwittingly training my body to stay guarded, not regenerate. That shift, the moment I recognized what sleep was truly doing or failing to do, changed everything. But it came with a heavy kind of clarity. It wasn't enough to just accept being tired. I had to deeply examine those hidden habits, those betrayals of rest occurring in the shadows of my nightly routine. It got personal, because this wasn't a surface fix. It was about reclaiming my health, my essence, my manhood. So here I am, inviting you to walk this path with me. Not because I have all the answers yet, but because I've been where you are. The place where effort feels futile, where energy escapes like water through fingers, and where the quiet wounds of broken sleep undermine every victory. This isn't a blame game or some quick fix pitch. It's an honest look behind the curtain, to the unseen forces stealing your recovery and quieting your power, to the truth that what we do before sleep, those little invisible habits, are shaping how our body rebuilds itself, how it decides whether to flood us with strength or drain us dry. If you're reading this and feeling the same tension tightening inside, the fog clouding your focus, or the dimming of that fire you didn't even realize was flickering out, you're in the right place. Because understanding what's truly happening behind the scenes is the first step toward breaking free. I want us to explore this together. How those hidden saboteurs sneak into your nights, how they crash your hormonal rhythm, and most importantly, how tuning into this secret life of your sleep unlocks a way back to clarity, confidence, and real energy. It's a conversation that matters, one that's as much about honoring our vulnerability as it is about unleashing strength. So let's dive in hand, into the quiet night where transformation begins. There was a time when I thought the hardest part of recovery happened under the glaring fluorescent lights of the gym or in the strict measurements of my meal prep. Yet, it wasn't until I confronted the quiet chaos unfolding behind the scenes, within the realm of my nightly rest, that I realized the true weight of invisible influences stealing my masculine vitality. One particular night stands out vividly. I had just finished an intense workout, feeling the usual rush of accomplishment, only to find myself wide awake hours later, mind racing, muscles tense, unable to fall back asleep. The more I tossed and turned, the sharper my frustration grew, and it felt as if my body was betraying all my efforts. On that restless night, I stumbled into something I had completely overlooked until then: the subtle interplay of emotional tension and environmental signals silently sabotaging the regenerative processes I craved most. The buzzing notifications on my phone, the faint glare from the street lamp infiltrating my curtains, even the leftover caffeine from my afternoon coffee. All these elements contributed to fragmenting my rest in ways I hadn't understood before. Instead of merely focusing on sleep duration, I became attuned to how these nuances chipped away at the body's ability to reset. It's like trying to rebuild a fortress while the alarms keep blaring. It's impossible to funnel energy into restoration when the subconscious registers danger. My breakthrough came when I began to track the quality of my rest alongside my emotional state throughout the day. For instance, I noticed how days with tension, whether from work conflict, unresolved personal issues, or even subtle anxiety, correlated with uneven sleep cycles and a dulling of my usual drive. It was as if the subconscious mind refused to release control over survival instincts, keeping me on edge long after I hit the pillow. This connection wasn't just a vague suspicion. My body's reaction was clear: exhaustion paired with irritability, while hormonal balance teetered off its axis. On one occasion, after a particularly stressful argument with a close friend, I tried to force sleep early, only to lie awake plagued by a relentless mental loop replaying the confrontation. In that motionless night, I realized my internal physiology was deeply intertwined with these emotional imprints. I wasn't just fighting tiredness. I was wrestling with an undercurrent of unrest that rendered my body incapable of slipping into deeper rest. It made me question long-held beliefs about recovery being purely physical. Could my emotional landscape be actively dictating my hormonal output? Encouraged by this insight, I began experimenting with cultivating calm, introducing deliberate pre-sleep rituals focused on grounding rather than stimulation. I swapped my usual screen time for quiet reading, traded the harsh overhead lights for the soft glow of salt lamps, and incorporated breathing techniques specifically targeted at reducing the nervous system's tension. These small adjustments ushered in a shift. I started waking up feeling more refreshed, my mental clarity sharpened, and my patience returned with surprising speed. It was as though giving the body and mind permission to relax singed through the layers of chronic alertness. Another turning point arrived during a brief weekend retreat into nature. Without the typical digital distractions and city light pollution, my sleep transformed drastically. The natural darkness seemed to unlock a deeper level of fatigue and recovery. I felt bodily repair at a speed that defied previous experience. Muscle soreness faded quicker, and even my libido bounced back robustly. This immersion revealed how our artificial environments constantly conspire against the body's instinctive cycles. It wasn't just an absence of light or noise. There was a lost rhythm, a pulse of natural order that my system yearned for but didn't receive in daily life. Back in the city, I took this understanding further. I started to see how the smallest evening habits unraveled progress. Finishing late-night emails, drinking sugary beverages after sunset, even lurking on social media to unwind. Each action might seem inconsequential, yet collectively they sent my body mixed messages. Like a radio caught between stations, my internal systems scrambled to choose between rest and readiness, often defaulting to an anxious standby mode. This awareness forced me to reevaluate the sacredness of pre-bedtime moments and recognize my role in creating, or dismantling, that healing space. One evening, After consciously dimming all screens an hour earlier and sipping herbal tea by candlelight, I felt a wave of stillness envelop me unlike before. As I lay down, the usual mental chatter softened, replaced by a quiet anticipation of surrender. The deeper waves of sleep flowed naturally, unbroken and rich with restorative power. When morning came, my body hummed with a renewed vigor that echoed throughout my day and even into my workouts. This experience crystallized the lesson that quality recovery extends beyond the mattress. It's a holistic event shaped by intentional behaviors and thoughts. Understanding that the restoration of hormonal balance hinges on this delicate dance between environment and mind was profoundly liberating. It shifted my focus from merely accumulating hours of rest to crafting conditions that coax the body into authentic healing. While the physical acts of training and nourishment remain essential, I now grasp that the silent, often overlooked interlude of night determines the real foundation on which male energy is built. Without this sacred embrace of regenerative darkness, even the most diligent man risks losing touch with the core power within. So when you face nights swirling with fragmented rest or wake up to that creeping sense of depletion, remember it's not a random fate or inevitable decline. Your body is reflecting an unmet need for sanctuary, a pause not just of muscles, but of breath, thought, and tension. By honing awareness of these subtle dynamics and embracing a gentle, structured approach to winding down, you can begin reclaiming the plentiful reserves of strength and presence that define authentic masculinity. It's through tending carefully to the spaces between wakefulness and sleep that true transformation begins to take shape. One night, after weeks of struggling with scattered rest, I found myself lying awake long after the house had settled into silence. The shadows seemed heavier, and my mind churned with a restless intensity that felt physical, almost as though an invisible weight pressed on my chest. I couldn't shake the sensation that something fundamental was slipping through my grasp. But what? As hours passed, I realized it wasn't just fatigue gnawing at me. It was a signal from deep within, a warning that my internal balance was unraveling in ways I'd never consciously acknowledged before. That night, I began paying attention to the subtle internal shifts triggered by how I prepared for sleep. Unlike prior attempts where I tried to force calm with breathing apps or meditation, I focused instead on my relationship with sensation, how warmth, silence, and touch could influence the tides inside. I noticed that when I indulged in a hot bath, allowing my muscles to surrender to the soothing heat, drowsiness brewed more naturally. Yet, the bath needed to end at a precise window. Too late, and it disrupted the body's temperature regulation, oddly enough leaving me wired rather than soothed. This delicate timing taught me that restoration unfolds on nuanced rhythms and that impatience only disturbs rather than fosters healing. During these restless nights, one particular memory kept returning to me, a moment with my grandfather. After a long day, he had a ritual of sitting in his favorite armchair, staring out as the sun dipped low, hands folded quietly. He never rushed to bed, but his presence grew mellow, and soon he'd disappear into sleep without resistance. I realized he honored a tacit agreement with his own recovery cycle, allowing the mind to ease at its own pace. What I craved was not just more sleep but the patient ritual of descent, the art of easing into rest with intention and softness, not through brute force. Another revelation dawned on me while grappling with the intrusion of light pollution, which I had never fully considered. Street lamps, digital glow, and blinking LEDs cast a pale haze that invaded my nightly refuge. One evening, out of desperation, I fashioned makeshift curtains and extinguished every single light in my room. I felt as though I had uncovered an ancient secret. Complete darkness became not just an absence but a presence, wrapping around me like a cloak. This depth of shadow quietly erased distractions, allowing awareness to dissolve and sleep to find me gently. The contrast with prior nights was stark. Where once I tossed and turned, I now drifted with more fluidity, my breath steadying like a calm river. I also experimented with sensory withdrawal. The mixture of soft silence and near invisibility of shapes in a fully darkened room unlocked something primal. There's an ancient language we've lost in modern chaos, a language that our nervous systems speak fluently only when shielded from stimuli. On several occasions, After creating that haven of darkness and stillness, I would wake feeling reconnected to a center I hadn't realized was frayed. Sharpness of thought returned alongside a grounded sense of purpose. It became evident that regeneration demanded not just passive rest but active cultivation of an environment inviting surrender. One evening, I took this further by removing all traces of sound. Usually, some background hum from an air conditioner or refrigerator was present, but I found a way to soften even those murmurs to near inaudibility. Lying there in that utter quietude, a near void, I felt like I had entered a rare sanctuary. My nervous system began to shed its habitual armor, and the tension embedded deep within released incrementally. Despite the initial discomfort of such silence, I realized this was part of recovery's truth. We must sometimes brave the stillness to reclaim ourselves. In a surprising twist, I discovered the profound impact of pre-sleep nutrition on my nightly restoration. Avoiding heavy meals late, especially those rich in sugars or processed ingredients, prevented the litany of restless awakenings I had become accustomed to. Instead, I introduced simple, easily digestible choices: lavender tea, a small handful of nuts, or tart cherry juice. One night, after sipping this modest elixir, my transition into deep rest was swifter, and by dawn, I felt an energy that defied the usual morning grogginess. It was as if feeding into the night with intelligence rather than force allowed my core systems to engage fully in their nightly repair work. Not all breakthroughs came easily, though. I recall a weekend where a schedule disruption led to a late night of intense screen exposure and caffeine indulgence. The following day, I felt like a deflated man, mentally foggy and drained far beyond typical fatigue. It wasn't just tiredness. It was a profound depletion, a reminder that modern patterns wield an insidious influence. That experience sharpened my commitment to protect my nights fiercely, adjusting even social and work habits to honor the sacred window where regeneration flourishes. Through these trials, I learned that recovery isn't a destination but an unfolding practice, a dance between honoring limits and setting boundaries. I found myself setting an unspoken pact to defend those hours preceding rest as fiercely as I pursued my workouts. Instead of viewing sleep as a passive necessity, I began to cherish it as an active partner in vitality, a complex performance demanding respect, sensitivity, and care. Now, consider how this applies when you face nights brimming with restlessness or mornings where clarity slips like morning mist. It's not a lapse of character but an invitation to engage in a more profound dialogue with your internal landscape. When you adjust the cues, light, sound, temperature, nourishment, you recalibrate the internal compass guiding restoration. In those moments, your masculinity, focus, and presence rise not from extra willpower but from a cultivated harmony between external practices and internal readiness. These discoveries reshaped my relationship with sleep from an obligation to a sanctuary, a wellspring of resilience. Embracing darkness, silence, sensory attunement, and mindful nourishment translated into renewed energy that infused into all parts of life: work, connection, and passion. The journey taught me not just how to sleep better, but how to live stronger. I can still recall the moment my night unraveled completely, when the quiet moonlight creeping through the window intersected with an unrelenting flood of thoughts racing through my mind. Sleep had become a battleground, where subconscious worries seemed determined to keep me tethered to waking hours. But what struck me most was how deeply those pre-sleep habits had carved grooves in my recovery, shaping more than the hours I rested. They sculpted the very essence of my vitality. It wasn't merely about lying still. It was about crafting a prelude that coaxed the nervous system into genuine surrender. The realization dawned gradually. After dismissing countless strategies for enhancing nighttime restoration, I understood that the secret was woven into rituals that cultivated inner calm, yet hadn't considered how subtle factors like room temperature profoundly influenced my ability to regenerate. When I experimented by lowering the thermostat just a few degrees, a startling transformation took place. That cooler embrace seemed to signal a green light to my physiology, inviting a deeper descent into restorative phases. Conversely, warmer nights triggered short awakenings, a restlessness so slight it almost escaped detection, yet potent enough to erode hormonal balance. There was an almost primal signal embedded in that environmental cue, a whisper from ancestral rhythms reminding me of how our ancestors slumbered in caves, cool and sheltered from intrusive heat. The modern tendency to overheat bedrooms with thick blankets or high temperatures challenged that adaptation, alerting our systems to defend rather than regenerate. I marveled at how such a seemingly minor adjustment could ripple outward, enhancing sleep architecture and fueling renewed drive by morning. During this journey, I also uncovered the profound interference caused by habitual evening stimulants that I had long underestimated. The habit of reaching for artificial scents, like scented candles with nicotine-like fragrances or even certain aggressive household odors, subtly amped the nervous system unknowingly. I realized scents carry powerful emotional and physiological triggers, some that can mimic mild stress responses, undermining readiness for regenerative processes. Once I eliminated synthetic fragrances from my space and replaced them with gentle, earth-based aromas like cedarwood or sandalwood, the atmosphere felt grounding, priming relaxation in a way that words could hardly express. My wife once laughed when she caught me methodically sniffing different essential oils to find one that calmed my racing mind. "You're turning bedtime into a chemistry lab," she joked, but that experiment lent texture to my understanding. These small, deliberate choices layered together formed a sanctuary where recovery could flourish. It reminded me how habitats shape their inhabitants. In this case, the home environment sculpting the nocturnal recuperation vital to masculine energy. Another nuanced discovery emerged through social interactions after sundown. I noticed that arguments or even difficult conversations late in the day had a lingering shadow, an energy that clawed into my subconscious and stretched into restless terrain. Shielding myself from tense exchanges before bedtime brought an unexpected peace, unveiling how relational dynamics feed into physiological states. Instead of bottling stress and hoping for mental silence to take over, this boundary reoriented my evenings, creating a buffer that preserved clarity for deeper regenerative cycles. An example surfaced during a family gathering where a minor disagreement bubbled into frustration well past sunset. I went to bed heated, tension bruising my chest. The hours ahead felt like a slow chokehold on peace, fracturing rest into restless fragments. Reflecting afterward, I recognized that my evening emotional blueprint imprinted on subsequent recovery's quality. These emotional residues resembled a stubborn graffiti, marring the pristine canvas needed for rebuilding strength. That night instilled a firm resolve. Reciprocating calm in close relationships before rest is as vital as regulating light or temperature. Interestingly, mindfulness practices tailored for unwinding also evolved into a powerful tool in my arsenal. Instead of abstract meditation, I linked breath work with tactile sensation, tracing textures like coarse wood or cool stone, grounding my awareness in the here and now. This tangible focus interrupted runaway mental patterns, anchoring me in the moment where surrender becomes possible. The process resembled a gentle dialogue between the racing mind and the inviting stillness of night, guiding me gradually into restorative depths. In that space, I learned how to invite the regenerative pulse near, not by wrestling tiredness but by floating alongside it. One particular night stayed with me. As I sat quietly stroking a smooth river rock gifted by a friend, the chaotic thoughts that usually stormed my mind softened into whispers. My breath lengthened, heart ease unfolded, and the pull toward restful release became almost magnetic. The sensation wasn't magical but profoundly human. A shift from resistance to acceptance that laid down invisible pathways toward restoration. From that experience, I realized recovery thrives less on effort and more on delicate cooperation with natural rhythms. At times, the hardest part was surrendering control, the instinct to push through every restless night with willpower and stubbornness. But yielding to the ritual of uncurling, of letting go in incremental, mindful steps, proved more transformative than any act of force. I imagine this yielding as a river carves canyons, not through brute strength but patient persistence. Each evening habit I adjusted, each boundary I safeguarded, produced subtle erosion of chronic tension, paving the way for profound renewal. I want you to imagine your own space as a sacred grove, a place where every choice, from temperature to scent to social energy, builds the foundation for thriving recovery. The patterns we adopt quietly instruct our systems what to expect, And by intentionally curating these environmental and emotional cues, we cultivate fertile ground where masculine energy can bloom and regenerate naturally. The secret isn't in grand gestures, but in the meticulous artistry of evening rituals, crafting conditions for deep, uninterrupted resurgence. Now think back to your last few nights. What sounds, smells, conversations, or temperatures did you invite into your sleep sanctuary? Where can you start weaving new threads that support, rather than fracture, your renewal? The transformation begins there, in the unnoticed details that shape your most vital reset. Reflecting on this journey so far, I find myself standing at a threshold, a place where countless threads of understanding converge, yet the path ahead remains invitingly open. It feels like walking through a dense forest at dusk, where shafts of fading light weave through the canopy, casting shifting patterns on the earth beneath my feet. Each step forward reveals textures and scents that mingle, hinting at a landscape far richer and deeper than surface impressions ever conveyed. The sensations of discovery pulse beneath my skin, urging me onward with a newfound sense of reverence and expectancy. I recall moments when I felt locked inside a restless storm, the swirling currents overwhelming and relentless. But gradually a subtle shift took hold. Within the chaotic dance of tension and release, a stillness began to emerge, less a conquest of the tempest and more an intimate dance with its rhythm. It was as if I learned to listen to the undercurrents, the murmurs beneath the roar, and in doing so, unlocked access to a sanctuary of renewal that had always been present yet largely overlooked. This sanctuary doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It reveals its secrets to those patient enough to attune to the faintest vibrations. This faint, yet potent, invitation to pause and recalibrate has settled into me like the gentle cadence of breath on a quiet morning before dawn. There's something profoundly human in this surrender, a humility that bridges the desire for control with the wisdom of yielding. That tension between effort and release, between mastery and trust, plays out with constant subtlety throughout our days and nights. I caught myself marveling at how these invisible negotiations shape the fabric of endurance and presence. Every choice, interaction, and environmental whisper contributes to a resonant field where true vitality can either flourish or falter. What fascinates me is how this dance, so delicate and intimate, mirrors forces far beyond individual habits. It connects to something ancestral, like an echo left deep within the marrow of our existence. Imagine it as a vast underground river flowing beneath the landscape of our modern routines, a current carrying ancient truths waiting to be acknowledged. This current pulses persistently, regardless of our awareness, nudging us toward coherence and balance if only we dare to follow its subtle signs. I find it humbling that tuning in to this flow requires shedding layers of distraction we've accumulated, revealing an original form of strength grounded in alignment rather than opposition. There's a quiet invitation embedded here, a call to honor the unwritten rhythms that underlie our experiences of fatigue and energy, tension and release. It beckons like a flickering flame in a cavern, flickering yet steady, guiding us through shadows toward an unseen chamber of possibility. It demands sensitivity and courage, an openness to perceive the unseen and the often unspoken forces that sculpt our vitality with quiet persistence. Engaging with this invitation compels a reevaluation of what power truly means, shifting the narrative from external conquest to internal attunement. In my reflections, I recognize that this isn't a linear path with quick fixes or clear-cut answers. Instead, it unfolds as an ongoing interplay between presence and practice, trial and insight. Like a craftsman refining a piece of wood with infinite patience, we shape our condition through countless adjustments, some instinctual, others learned, some immediate, others revealed through time's gentle unveiling. The craft here is subtle, measured in the textures of sensation, the cadence of breath, and the delicate sequencing of moments that define how we step into and out of rest. As I explore these contours of experience, a sense of anticipation builds, not from certainty, but from the fertile tension of possibility. There's a promise not of perfection but of profound reclamation, a reclaiming of something primal yet resilient that dwells beneath layers of modern strain. This emerging awareness becomes a compass, quietly pointing toward a horizon where presence deepens and energy regenerates with integrity. It invites us to reimagine our engagement with rest as an act of creation, weaving together scattered fragments into a tapestry of balance, strength, and clarity. Sitting with these thoughts, I feel a profound kinship with anyone who has journeyed through shadowed valleys only to glimpse the first hint of dawn. It's a shared odyssey marked by moments of uncertainty, quiet breakthroughs, and the relentless yearning for wholeness. As we prepare to cross from this place of inquiry into the unfolding passage ahead, I find myself listening deeply to the inner stirrings, the subtle signals that hold the key to embracing the fullness of each day and night with renewed conviction. It's here, in this liminal space between seeking and knowing, that the most meaningful steps begin to emerge. Sometimes, when I lie awake in the small hours, a swirl of thoughts weaving through the tapestry of shadows on my ceiling, I realize how much more there is to rest than the simple act of closing my eyes. It's as if sleep itself holds a secret language, one whispered through the rhythms of deep renewal, through moments where every cell is invited to rebuild, recharge, and realign. For years, I mistook the surface of sleep for its entirety, believing that stretching the hours alone would fill my tank. But now, I sense that the true measure lies somewhere deeper, where vulnerability meets quiet strength and restoration patiently unfolds. I remember a moment when, after days of fragmented nights, I sank into bed and felt a surrender unlike any I'd known before. It wasn't an immediate surrender. My mind raced, my limbs tensed, but gradually, a subtle shift occurred. The grasp of tension loosened, and I felt as if I had slipped beneath a current pulling me away from relentless wakefulness toward a peaceful unknown. That sensation wasn't a victory won by force, but a gift revealed when I stopped wrestling and allowed myself to be carried. It was as though the weariness I carried wasn't a failure but an unspoken invitation to trust a process far beyond conscious control. This shift illuminated something profound. Vitality is less a commodity to be chased and more a living pulse flowing in and out of balance. I'd been chasing energy with grit and discipline, but energy demands its own rhythms and cycles, like the ocean tides or the unfolding of seasons. Each night offers the chance to immerse in these natural cycles, to align with them in a way that transcends routine or effort. When I honor this, rest ceases to be a passive gap between activity and instead becomes the fertile ground from which resilience and clarity spring. I also realized that the environments I inhabit before sleep silently shape the quality of what follows. The subtle interplay of light's warmth, the texture of my sheets brushing against skin, even the cadence of background sounds, all communicate cues that either invite renewal or stir vigilance. The degree to which I protect this threshold between day and night determines how deeply I can dive into rejuvenation. This understanding shaped a new respect for the moments I once took for granted: the closing of screens, the gentle dimming of lamps, the deliberate slowing of breath. They aren't mere rituals but bridges inviting passage from the clamor of the world into sanctuaries I've constructed within my surroundings and myself. One evening, before surrendering to sleep, I found myself tracing the curve of a wooden bead on a prayer bracelet, its worn surface cool beneath my fingers. That small, repetitive motion anchored me, a tactile meditation that tamed whispers of anxiety and unfolded a calm I hadn't realized I'd been craving. The steady rhythm matched the slowing wave of my heartbeat, as if reminding me that grounding is available when I choose to meet the present with softness rather than resistance. In that intimate moment, I learned that healing is woven from countless such gestures, small acts of kindness directed inward that shape our capacity to refresh. If I peer back at my own journey, I recognize how persistence became intertwined with patience, and how strength transformed when I embraced mystery over certainty. It's a continuum, this dance of fatigue and renewal, yet every cycle reveals new textures of self-awareness. I stopped seeking quick wins or silver bullets and instead began honoring incremental shifts, the gentle unfolding of awareness that gently rewrites my relationship with exhaustion and vitality. Each morning's awakening brought fresh possibilities, but only because the nights prior were cultivated with intention and presence. Now, when I feel the tug of restlessness creeping in, I remind myself to listen with compassion, to the subtle messages embedded in each sigh, each flicker of thought, every shift of temperature or light around me. The invitation is always present, to slow, to recalibrate, to create space where deep repair can take root. I understand now that masculine energy, often framed as raw power or drive, is equally nourished by softness and ease. It thrives in the alchemy of balancing activation with restoration, in the grace found between effort and surrender. I invite you, as someone who carries these same struggles, to discover your own rites of ease, those gestures and environments that quietly whisper belonging to your frame of reference. Notice what urges you toward tension and what beckons you closer to stillness. There is wisdom in this discernment, a map concealed in sensations and atmosphere that guides you back to your center. This isn't an act of weakness, but a conscious reclaiming of vibrant presence, forged in the acceptance of need and the courage to honor it. In the end, what has sustained me isn't a checklist of rules. It's the unfolding of an intimate partnership with my rhythms, a willingness to learn the language of fatigue and restoration with humility and curiosity. When rest deepens, clarity sharpens. When renewal flows, strength unfolds naturally. Let this be a call to shape each night as a sacred passage where energy is not demanded but invited, where the quiet surrender ahead of sleep becomes the source of all the power that follows.